The story begins with Rose, a pregnant woman who had been in labor for hours, enduring excruciating pain with immense courage. Surrounded by a crowd of onlookers, whispers filled the room as they observed her struggle. The Duke, her husband, was deeply concerned for her well-being, as Rose appeared utterly exhausted. The Empress tried to reassure the Duke, reminding him that childbirth is a challenging ordeal. After 10 hours of labor, tension filled the air as everyone grew increasingly anxious. The Emperor's eldest son, though initially excited, grew restless and bored due to the long wait. The Empress comforted the boy, cradling him in her arms, and explained that the moment was near. Meanwhile, Rose continued to cry out in pain, struggling to bear the prolonged agony. Finally, the time arrived, and the Duke was overcome with joy as he became a father. However, a surprise awaited him. Rose had given birth to not one but 2 daughters. The Duke's emotions were a mix of happiness and shock. While he felt immense pride in becoming a father of twins, he was also overwhelmed by the unexpected news. The Emperor noticed the Duke's emotional turmoil, sensing his simultaneous fear and joy. A few moments later, the Duke composed himself, feeling elated and proud as the maids brought the crying newborns to him. The Emperor's eldest son, excited to meet his baby sisters, eagerly examined the 2 red, wrinkled infants. Despite his enthusiasm, the Empress thought his behavior was a bit inappropriate. However, the Duke, dizzy with happiness, paid no attention to such concerns. As the Duke held his newborn daughters, his heart was filled with love and peace. Their tiny fingers gripped his hands, and he couldn't believe his luck. The boy, curious and thrilled to have siblings, observed the babies closely, imagining the days ahead when they could all play together. Among the newborns was Tina, who soon realized that she was no ordinary baby. She had been reborn into another life. Memories of her previous life, including the moment of her death, were vivid in her mind. She was astonished to find herself in a tiny body, unable to speak or move as she once did. Despite her confusion and uncertainty, Tina resolved to embrace her new life. Looking at her sister, who seemed just as small and fragile, Tina began to make sense of her strange surroundings. Shito, the Emperor's eldest son, studied Tina curiously. Unlike her sister, Tina didn't cry or laugh. Instead, she frowned, which made her seem peculiar to the boy. He tentatively poked her forehead, intrigued by her reactions. This simple gesture upset Tina, and out of frustration and helplessness, she burst into tears. The Duke rushed to soothe her, but he didn't reprimand Shito, recognizing that he was just a child and unfamiliar with how to handle babies. Tina herself was confused by her reaction, feeling both weak and powerless, but her cries only seemed to amuse her father. His laughter annoyed her, but she was unaware of how endearing and adorable she appeared at that moment to Duke. Duke, observing Tina, decided she must be angry. The Duke, however, remained captivated by his new daughters, despite the sound of Tina's wails echoing through the room. Suddenly, a maid entered the scene, her expression filled with fear and sorrow. She delivered devastating news. Rose had lost too much blood during childbirth and had passed away. The Duke was paralyzed with grief, tears streaming down his face. The newborn girls, too, grew restless and fussy, as if sensing the tragedy. Tina, fully aware of the situation, was consumed by despair. She had just entered this new life and had already lost her mother, someone she would never have the chance to know. The Duke, unwilling to believe the maid's words, was struck with disbelief, hoping that it was all a nightmare or a mistake. He rushed into the room where his beloved wife lay, desperate for answers. Inside, the Emperor and a maid stood by Rose's lifeless body. The maid shocked everyone by suggesting that the newborn twins should be sacrificed. His words were as horrifying as thunder on a clear day. Tina, still too young to speak, could only stare in terror, unable to comprehend why her life was already being threatened. Tina, knowing the situation, placed her hand on her father's cheek as he saw the pleading look in her eyes, a look no one could ignore. The Duke, devastated yet determined, refused to accept such a cruel fate for his children. His love and resolve as a father were unwavering, and he vowed to protect his daughters at any cost. The man turned to the magician, stunned by the horrifying suggestion. Duke Kasa demanded an explanation, unable to comprehend how such a cruel proposal could be made.
The magician, in an unsettling calm, expressed his belief that the emperor should sentence the twins to death.
Outraged, the emperor demanded justification for such an inhumane suggestion, refusing to condemn the innocent lives of the newborns without a valid reason. The magician, devastated and furious, stood frozen in disbelief. As he explained, court doctors, who had examined the duchess throughout her pregnancy, had never detected any abnormalities, let alone the presence of twins. This revelation only deepened the duke's mistrust. He began to question the competence of the doctors, branding them as failures. Overwhelmed with grief, he couldn't fathom losing not only his wife but also being forced to sacrifice his daughters. Meanwhile, the infants lay in their father's arms, oblivious to the turmoil around them. Tina, however, fully aware of the situation, tried to soothe her crying sister, appearing impossibly composed for her tiny frame. Enraged, Casa grabbed his sword, intent on striking down the magician who dared suggest killing his children. His protective instincts overrode his reason, and he could no longer tolerate the audacity of such a monstrous idea. The room erupted into chaos as everyone attempted to calm the duke. Tina, terrified, mentally pleaded with her father to stop. The empress, visibly agitated, grew increasingly annoyed at Casa's behavior, especially with his sword drawn so close to the magician. Blinded by despair, Casa didn't realize the gravity of his actions, nor could he control his emotions. The terrified magician begged for mercy, pleading with Casa not to harm him. Instead of following through with violence, the duke shoved the magician aside and commanded him to leave at once. His voice dripped with disdain as he insulted the mage, calling him a fraud and warning him never to interfere in his family matters again. The empress clenched her fists in anger, her patience nearly exhausted. Casa then turned to the emperor and empress, thanking them for their presence but hinting that it was time for them to leave. He wished to mourn privately and see his beloved wife, whose death had shattered his heart. As he held both babies, memories of the battlefield flashed through his mind. Duke Casa, a man who had slain countless enemies on the battlefield, had been awarded a Medal of Honor for Life by His Majesty, recognizing his unmatched service and frame. Yet, despite his services, Casa felt deeply wronged by how he and his daughters were treated. The Duke, overwhelmed with grief and rage, lashed out at the magician, calling him a charlatan and a fraud. He made it clear that he didn't want this man meddling in his personal affairs. The emperor silently observed the entire situation, analyzing everything carefully. His expression gradually shifted, his face darkening with anger. Little Tina, perceptive beyond her years, noticed the emperor's fury and mentally begged her father to calm down, though, of course, no one could hear or understand her silent plea. The tension in the room was suffocating. Amidst the chaos, young Cheeto stood out to Tina as a kind and sweet boy. He watched her attentively, his gentle demeanor offering a brief respite from the turmoil. He approached her, greeted her warmly. Tina couldn't help but appreciate the boy's kindness, even in such a tense moment. Meanwhile, Casa knelt beside his wife, Rose, picking her up and cradling her lifeless body in his arms. Desperation filled his voice as he begged her to open her eyes, clinging to a sliver of hope that she might still be alive. Little Tina, looking at her mother's serene but lifeless face, felt her tiny heart break. The realization that she would never experience her mother's lullabies, kisses, or warm hugs filled her with an unbearable sadness, and she began to cry. Sue, her twin sister, on the other hand, smiled innocently at their mother, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that had occurred. To her, their mother's still body meant nothing more than her presence, and it made her happy. The maids, watching this stark contrast between the twins' reactions, were horrified. They whispered amongst themselves, speculating about the girl's strange behavior. Tina, overhearing their insensitive remarks, cast them a sharp and serious look that made one of the maids visibly uncomfortable. There was something unsettling about Tina's demeanor, far too mature and intense for a newborn. Sue, still cheerful, reached out her small hands toward their mother and laughed loudly, oblivious to the grief surrounding her. For Tina, the sight of her sister's innocent joy was painful. She knew their mother would never smile back, and the weight of that reality crushed her. Sadness and pain enveloped her, but when Sue's laughter turned to tears, something unexpected stirred within Tina. Hearing her sister cry triggered a sudden shift in Tina's emotions. She resolved then and there to never cry again, for her sister's sake. Her sobbing ceased abruptly, and she calmed down, much to the astonishment of the maids. One of them whispered to another that Tina's behavior was highly unusual for a baby. She seemed far too intelligent and composed. Suddenly, the room was bathed in an unearthly light as the twins clasped hands. To everyone's shock, Rose's eyes fluttered open. It was as if she had come back to life. Gasps echoed around the room, and the Duke's heart soared with joy. He gazed at his wife in awe, unable to contain his happiness at what he thought was a miracle. But the maids began screaming in terror, their panicked cries filling the air. One of them shouted hysterically that the corpse had risen. Tina, fully understanding the fragile situation, instinctively felt that no one could be allowed to leave the room. The Duke, furious with the maids' outbursts, used his magic to immobilize them, forcing them to stay in place. Turning his attention back to Rose, Kasa's eyes brimmed with joy and disbelief as he admired her, whispering his dreams of raising their daughters together. For a fleeting moment, he believed everything would be all right. But the miracle was short-lived. As suddenly as she had awoken, Rose's body went limp once more, falling lifelessly into Kasa's arms. All the hope and joy he had felt were crushed in an instant. She was truly gone. The Duke's pain, sadness, and despair were beyond words. His dreams of a happy family shattered before his eyes as he held the lifeless body of his beloved wife. 3 months later, the tragedy of Rose's death remained the talk of the empire. The emperor gathered the nobles for a grand event at the palace, and the air buzzed with chatter, laughter, and, of course, gossip. The primary subject of discussion was Duke Kasa and his twin daughters. When the girls were born, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the twins had the ability to resurrect the dead, while others whispered absurd tales about how the girls brought their mother back to life only to have her kill a servant before dying again. People enjoyed speculating wildly, letting their imaginations run free, and many were gripped by fear of the twins' supposed abilities, which sent chills down their spines. The girls were soon labeled as cursed beings and stars of misfortune. That day, Duke Kasa overheard numerous hurtful rumors about his family and silently endured the humiliation. He longed for the day when people would simply forget. Tensions rose when one man, shouting "Reincarnation of the devil," threw a stone at Tina with all his strength. Tina watched in terror as the stone hurtled toward her face. She instinctively raised her tiny hands to shield herself, silently questioning why she deserved such cruelty. But to everyone's astonishment, the stone abruptly veered away, missing Tina entirely. She let out a sigh of relief, believing it to be mere luck. However, it was no coincidence as Kasa, clad in armor and ever watchful over his daughters, had used his magic to deflect the stone. His love for his children knew no bounds, and he silently vowed that anyone who dared harm them would pay with their life. His unwavering determination and fierce protective instincts were both admirable and terrifying. Meanwhile, the Empress sat regally on her throne, observing the Duke. To her, Kasa showed insufficient respect to her and the Emperor, despite all his contributions to protecting the empire. Though the Emperor admired Kasa's loyalty and courage, the Empress's patience with him was wearing thin. When Kasa approached, holding one of his daughters in his arms, he knelt before the Emperor in greeting. The Emperor graciously asked him to rise, smiling warmly, and expressed his appreciation for the Duke's service. This display of respect irritated the Empress, who believed the Duke's behavior bordered on insolence. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The magician began his examination of the twins. His findings would determine their fate. Despite his anxiety, the Duke reluctantly handed over his daughters, his heart pounding with fear. The girls, however, were oblivious to the tension. They giggled and tugged at the magician's long beard, finding it amusing. Kasa, on the other hand, was deeply worried that the magician might harm them under the guise of his examination. His hands trembled, and his heart raced as he watched. The Empress, in stark contrast, was in a cheerful mood, smiling often. She tried to reassure Kasa of the magician's competence, emphasizing his many years of loyal service to the royal family. However, her smile only unnerved Tina, who saw it as the grin of a villain. Tina was certain that both her and her sister's lives were in danger, but she was powerless to intervene. Using his magic, the magician levitated the twins, making them float as if they were lying on clouds. Sue, frightened by the sensation, clung to Tina's sleeve. Tina found herself admiring her little sister's innocence and vulnerability. Sue's tiny eyes were wide with fear, unable to comprehend what was happening. The scene became even stranger when the twins began speaking to each other in their own incomprehensible baby language, leaving the adults baffled. Despite the tension, the girls seemed to find some joy in the situation, laughing as they bounced on their magical bubbles. Suddenly, Sue began to cry loudly. Casa couldn't understand what Tina had said to her sister, suspecting it was some secret shared only between them. But Tina knew what was coming. She anticipated that the Emperor and Empress might decide to destroy them after hearing the magician's report. In an attempt to calm her sister, Tina gently patted Sue's head, then started laughing and jumping on the bubble to cheer her up. Sue soon joined in, giggling and playing. For a brief moment, Casa's heart swelled with pride and happiness as he watched his daughter's innocence and charm. He marveled at how different they were. Sue was sweet, shy, and gentle, while Tina was playful, mischievous, and full of personality. Yet, he also felt the immense weight of responsibility, knowing he had to be both father and mother to them in a world that seemed determined to destroy them. The magician, however, continued his grim analysis, concluding that the twins were indeed cursed demonesses. His words were like daggers to Casa's heart, but Tina, fully aware of the danger, imagined terrifying scenarios where the magician might convince the Emperor and Empress to harm them. She mentally labeled the magician as a madman, bent on making them suffer. The Empress, watching everything unfold, grew uneasy. She didn't want the Emperor to be too lenient, fearing the potential threat the twins might pose to the nobles if the magician's claims were true. Just as the situation seemed to reach a boiling point, young Cheeto entered the room with an idea. The boy suggested that it would be fair to have a second opinion. Another magician should also examine the twins to verify the first magician's claims. Tina looked at Cheeto in awe, deeply impressed by his cleverness and touched by his attempt to help. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Casa, after some thought, agreed with the boy's suggestion, seeing wisdom in his words. He approached the Emperor, respectfully requesting that another magician be summoned to reassess the situation. The Emperor, reluctant but seeing Casa's resolve, eventually agreed to the proposal. He recognized that the Duke was prepared to fight to the last breath to protect his daughters. After some time, another mage began examining the girls. Suspended in the air, the twins were having the time of their lives, shaking the magical sphere playfully and causing laughter among the onlookers. Suddenly, the mage made a shocking declaration: Sue was the reincarnation of a goddess. The crowd erupted in pleasant surprise, marveling at the revelation. Tina, overjoyed for her sister, began to dance with excitement, her face lighting up with a radiant smile. She eagerly awaited her own evaluation, convinced that if her sister was almost divine, then surely she would be something even greater. But the mage's next words shattered her world. He announced that Tina was the reincarnation of the devil himself. Tina felt as though she'd been struck by lightning. Fear and disbelief coursed through her tiny body, and her hands began to tremble. Her heart pounded violently as she tried to process the terrible words. How could this be? She had done nothing wrong. Why was she being condemned? The Empress, standing abruptly, ordered Tina's execution, declaring that two of the Empire's best magicians couldn't possibly be mistaken. Tina's despair deepened as she reflected on her short and tragic life. Born into a noble family, she had already lost her mother at birth, and now, just 3 months later, she was sentenced to death. Little Cheeto, saddened by the news, stepped forward and pleaded with the mage for another inspection. He had grown fond of Tina and didn't want her to come to harm. Meanwhile, the enraged Duke had no intention of following the Emperor's orders. He knew that if he complied, he would lose Tina forever, something he would never allow. Gathering both of his daughters into his arms, he hugged them tightly, swearing to protect them. With resolve burning in his eyes, Casa warned everyone present that anyone who dared harm his daughters would face his wrath. Using his magic, the Duke took to the sky, flying away with the twins in his arms. Tina felt a surge of pride for her father, marveling at his bravery. Few would dare defy the Emperor and the Empress, but her father's love for them made him unstoppable. Still, Tina couldn't help but worry about the consequences he might face for this bold act of defiance. Holding them close, Casa silently promised to care for his precious daughters for as long as he lived. The twins, despite their clumsy movements, hugged their father back, clinging to him as tightly as their small hands allowed. 7 years had passed, and the girls had grown up. Despite everything, their father's love for his daughters remained unchanged, even though Tina had been declared the reincarnation of the devil 3 years earlier. The prophecy about the reincarnation of the devil had finally been confirmed by a single clue. Tina bore the image of a butterfly on her face, which revealed her true essence. In their world, such a marking was considered ominous, a bad omen. However, the butterfly itself was strikingly beautiful and seemed to suit Tina perfectly. To Tina, it was a symbol of her inner beauty and purity. She even believed that it brought her good luck. Ironically, this very mark became the undeniable proof of her being the reincarnation of the devil. Accepting this harsh reality was not easy, but life had to go on. Every morning, Tina would look at her reflection in the mirror. She admired the butterfly, which appeared so vivid and lifelike. To her, it only made her more beautiful. Sooty, her twin sister, was always by her side, their bond so strong that they could sense each other's emotions even from a distance. It was as if Sooty could transfer her love and tranquility to Tina, instantly soothing her. Tina often asked her sister if she was beautiful, struggling to bear the stigma attached to her identity. Sooty always reassured and comforted her twin, acting not only as her sister but also her best friend. The two girls shared all their secrets and leaned on each other through every challenge. Tina frequently felt saddened by what she saw as an imperfection. She envied others and lamented the body she was born into. Sooty never truly understood why her sister cried so much but made it her mission to lift her spirits. She constantly reminded Tina that they were the most beautiful and special people in the world. Sooty accepted her role as her sister's source of comfort, always ready to wipe Tina's tears and offer words of encouragement. Despite their struggles, the sisters loved each other deeply, a bond that was evident to anyone who observed them. They spent nearly all their time together, inseparable in both heart and presence. However, their family life wasn't without its challenges. They had a brother, Bolo, who often marveled at the way the girls carried themselves as if they were the center of the universe. Bolo, in stark contrast, was brimming with confidence and viewed Tina with disdain because of the butterfly mark. He frequently teased and insulted her, calling her names. His older twin brothers supported his behavior, leaving Tina and Sooty to navigate their world of bullying and disrespect largely on their own. Tina bore the pain of their mockery with courage, but the constant ridicule began to weigh on her. One day, unable to endure Bolo's relentless insults, Tina rolled up her sleeves, ready to confront him physically. Bolo's arrogance knew no limits, and his behavior demanded consequences. However, Sooty tried to calm her sister, reminding her that fighting was childish and unbecoming. But Bolo continued his taunts, convinced that Tina wouldn't dare lay a finger on him. Suddenly, Robert, a boy who often came to Tina's defense, appeared. Tina admired Robert, viewing him as her kind and considerate prince. Although Robert was disheveled from just waking up, he immediately confronted Bolo, asking him to behave properly. However, Robert's attempt to intervene ended badly. Bolo struck him, knocking him to the ground. The sisters watched in shock as Bolo unleashed a series of blows on Robert, who seemed powerless to fight back. Tina, initially hopeful that Robert would rise and defend himself, grew increasingly furious as the violence continued. Finally, she mustered her courage and began threatening Bolo. Although the sisters had long agreed never to use magic in front of others, Tina could no longer restrain herself. Tina was utterly exhausted by the arrogance of her self-confident brother, Bolo. Sooty stood frozen in anticipation, watching as her brave and fiery sister finally unleashed her pent-up anger. With fierce determination, Tina lunged at Bolo, striking him with all her strength. At the same time, she shouted at him, demanding he never dare to insult or hurt another girl again. Their twin brothers, who were standing nearby, rolled their eyes but couldn't hide their amazement at Tina's unexpected strength. She moved with such skill and control that it seemed she had been secretly training for years. Sudi let out a sigh of relief, grateful that no one noticed Tina using magic in the heat of the moment. Tina's fighting was so precise and natural that it masked the traces of her power. Bulu, on the other hand, was left in complete disbelief as his sister overpowered him so decisively. When the scuffle ended, a newfound calm descended upon the group. However, Robert, who had tried to intervene earlier, still lay motionless on the ground. Despite the chaos, Tina and Sudi's spirits were lifted. They felt sure that Bulu would never trouble Tina again. Satisfied, Tina helped Robert to his feet, noticing a large lump forming on his head. Thinking quickly, she grabbed a pen and painted over the lump, adding some creative designs to make light of the situation. The boys, humiliated and sore, now bore various marks and freckles on their faces, courtesy of Tina's impromptu lesson in humility. She was confident that this punishment would teach them kindness and respect moving forward. Tina, Sudi, and Robert couldn't help but laugh at the comical sight of the defeated brothers, turning the tense situation into a moment of shared humor. The next morning, Tina woke up in a state of panic and rushed to wake her sister. Tears streaming down her face, she cried that her beloved puppy, Tata, was missing. Frantic, she explained that she had searched everywhere for him but could find no trace. Determined to locate the missing dog, the sisters quickly set off on a search. Sudi, always the optimist, tried to reassure her sister, suggesting that Tata was probably just playing somewhere nearby. Tina, however, was convinced this was yet another one of Bulu's cruel pranks and was determined to find him and make him pay for his mischief. Before Sudi could even respond, Tina had already dashed out of the room, filled with determination. Sudi, who was still groggy from sleep, glanced in the mirror, noticing her long, light-colored hair was messy. She decided to quickly fix her hair and change her clothes before running after her unpredictable sister. Experience had taught her that Tina's fiery temper often led her to act before thinking, and Sudi felt it was her duty to keep her sister in check, especially in tense situations. Meanwhile, Bulu and his twin brothers were outside in the yard, enjoying a sunny day. They joked around and roasted meat, seemingly carefree. Tina stormed up to them, her face a mixture of anger and desperation, and demanded to know where her dog was. Bulu nonchalantly waved her off, claiming he didn't know anything about it and telling her to stop being a nuisance. Tina, devastated by the disappearance of her beloved companion, refused to back down. One of the twin brothers, holding a piece of roasted meat, cruelly remarked that the puppy was ready. Tina froze in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. Tata, her loyal and cherished friend, had been killed. Bulu, showing no remorse, waved the meat in her face and even offered to share it, justifying his actions as revenge for the humiliation he had suffered the previous day. He calmly declared that he intended to eat her dog and would even send her 100 new ones as replacements. His smugness and cruelty were unbearable, and Tina's heart broke at the thought of her beloved Tata being treated so callously. Overwhelmed with grief and rage, Tina's expression darkened. Her love for Tata ran deep, and the thought of him being reduced to this was unbearable. She was determined to make Bulu pay for his unforgivable act. Nearby, a boy named Shito and his servant, Leodore, had overheard the commotion and approached to investigate. Shito, watching from a distance, noticed Tina and the group of boys. Although he didn't immediately recognize her, Leodore reminded him of her identity. Tina, the girl long rumored to be the reincarnation of the devil. Shito recalled seeing her as a child in her father's arms, but her reputation as a devil had kept others at a distance ever since. Despite the rumors, Shito didn't see anything frightening about Tina. In fact, he found her strikingly beautiful, with the butterfly mark on her face only enhancing her unique charm. Leodore, however, couldn't understand Shito's perspective. To him, Tina appeared terrifying and unworthy of admiration. He even teased Shito, claiming the boy had terrible taste for finding beauty in someone like her. As the scene unfolded, Sudi came running to Tina's aid.
Sprinting past Cheeto and Leodore, Sooty's beauty immediately caught Leodore's eye. He thought she was a stunning little beauty, which didn't surprise him, as Sooty was also known as the reincarnation of the goddess. However, Cheeto paid no attention to Sooty, dismissing her as an ordinary girl compared to Tina. For Cheeto, Tina stood out like no one else ever had, and he found himself captivated by her presence. Meanwhile, Tina, filled with anguish, continued to confront Bulu over the loss of her dog. To her, Tata wasn't just a pet, he was family. Bulu, completely unfazed by the chaos around him, calmly tore pieces of meat with his teeth, chewing as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The sight pushed Tina to her breaking point. Her fury surged uncontrollably, and she declared with a cold, glassy gaze that she would kill him for what he had done to her beloved dog. Her eyes darkened, and her magic flared around her, radiating a dangerous energy. Tina was no longer holding back, she was ready to punish her dog's abuser. From a distance, Cheeto couldn't take his eyes off her. Despite the violence unfolding before him, he found himself falling for Tina. He marveled at her strength, recognizing that, even at the age of 7, she possessed an impressive level of magic. It was raw and powerful, far beyond what someone her age should be capable of. As Tina unleashed magical blows on Bulu, Cheeto watched her as if mesmerized, utterly enchanted by her ferocity and might. Leodore, standing by Cheeto's side, did not share his admiration. To him, Tina's actions were horrifying, and he found her to be nothing short of monstrous. Pulling out his notebook, he began jotting down everything he saw, determined to report it all to His Majesty later. To Leodore, these were not the playful squabbles of children but dangerous, unnatural events. Muttering under his breath, Leodore remarked that, for the safety of the world, this child, this reincarnation of the devil, should have been eliminated long ago, as was once planned. Cheeto, displeased by Leodore's words and actions, felt an urgent need to protect Tina. His feelings for her were innocent yet deeply sincere, and he saw it as his duty to keep her out of harm's way. Without hesitation, Cheeto decided to take drastic measures to stop Leodore from reporting what he had seen. Raising his hand, Cheeto struck Leodore with magic, erasing the servant's memory of the events. Leodore collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Cheeto assured himself that Leodore would wake up soon, completely oblivious to what had happened, as this wasn't the first time Cheeto had used such a spell on him. Satisfied that the incident would not be reported, Cheeto left Leodore lying on the ground and approached the group of children. By this point, the fight had escalated further. Sooty, who had been trying to separate Tina and Bulu, was now caught in the middle of the chaos. She pleaded with her sister to stop, as things were spiraling out of control. But Tina, consumed by her anger, continued to lash out. Realizing she had no choice, Sooty stepped between her sister and Bulu, acting as a shield for Tina. For a moment, Sooty's normally gentle and calm demeanor disappeared. Her face grew stern, and she confronted Bulu with an intensity that surprised everyone. She demanded that he treat Tina with respect, reminding him that she was a girl. But when Bulu refused to back down, Sooty's patience snapped. Summoning all her strength, she clenched her fists and struck him square in the face. Blood began to drip from Bulu's mouth, but Sooty didn't stop. Desperation and frustration fueled her as she struck him again and again. For the first time, the usually composed Sooty fought with wild determination, abandoning her usual restraint. Tina quickly joined in, and together, the sisters delivered what they believed to be a well-deserved punishment. Bulu, who had tormented them for so long, was finally brought to his knees. Bruised and battered, he could only kneel in humiliation. Exhausted from their efforts, Sooty grabbed Bulu by the collar and demanded that he apologize to Tina immediately. Though it wouldn't undo what had been done, Sooty was determined to make him understand the weight of his actions. Sooty, however, couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had crossed a line she never thought she would. She had fought like a boy, abandoning the image of the proper and composed young lady she usually tried to uphold. This uncharacteristic outburst unsettled her deeply, and she silently chastised herself for losing control. Tina, who had never seen her sister this angry before, was both surprised and concerned. She noticed Sooty's quiet self-reproach and realized just how much her sister had endured to protect her. Meanwhile, Chito had made his way closer to the group but regretted not arriving sooner. He had hoped to step in and help Tina, imagining himself as the hero of the moment, but his chance had slipped away. Watching Sooty clean the blood from Bulu's face, the boy gazed at Sooty with a sorrowful expression, and she began to feel a pang of guilt over her actions. Gathering her composure, she hugged Bulu and offered him an apology. Meanwhile, Chito, observing everything, began to piece together the truth. He realized that Tina, just like himself, possessed magic. He had noticed it earlier, particularly when Sooty was holding Bulu by the collar. Despite Sooty's efforts to conceal her sister's abilities, Chito saw through it. He thought about how unfair the world was. If Tina's magical abilities were ever discovered, people would fear her, shun her, and likely demand her execution. In contrast, if Sooty's magic was revealed, she would be celebrated, praised, and surrounded by people eager to support her. Two sisters with such similar appearances, yet destined for drastically different fates. Though Chito was still a child, he grasped the complexity of the situation with remarkable clarity. He felt a deep sense of pity for Tina. She hadn't chosen any of this, yet the world treated her so cruelly. As Chito approached the group, he recognized Bulu. The boy was known for his courage, but now he lay humiliated and bruised, clearly paying the price for his misbehavior. The sight was almost comical. Tina stood nearby while Sooty continued holding Bulu by the collar as he muttered insults under his breath. When the girls noticed Chito approaching, Tina's expression softened, and she smiled at him. That smile stirred something in Chito. It was familiar, bringing back memories of when she was just a little girl, always smiling and humming as she played. Now, standing before him, she was older, still young, but no longer the tiny child he remembered. Chito found himself captivated by her sparkling eyes and enchanting smile. For Tina, Chito's gaze felt different from what she was used to. People usually looked at her with fear or disdain, but his eyes held none of that. This unexpected attention made her feel pleased, though their silent exchange was quickly interrupted by Sooty. Embarrassed by her behavior during the fight, Sooty looked down, avoiding his gaze, and mumbled that she didn't normally hit people. Bulu, lying on the ground with a large lump on his head, pointed a trembling finger at Sooty and accused her of beating him. Turning to Chito, he demanded that he take action and punish her for being such a rascal. Realizing that her sister's reputation was at stake, Tina quickly stepped in. She placed a protective hand over Sooty and boldly declared that she had been the one to beat Bulu. She didn't want Sooty's image as a proper young lady tarnished because of a single incident. Turning to Chito, Tina asked with unwavering confidence if he had any complaints about her actions. Sooty, meanwhile, was silently panicking. When Bulu addressed Chito by name, she realized who he was, the Crown Prince. Although her memory of their past interactions was faint, she did remember that he had once saved her and Tina from a dangerous situation when they were very young. From an early age, Chito had been known for his courage and intelligence. Tina, however, misinterpreted Chito's expression. When she saw him smiling at her, she assumed he was mocking her. Unaccustomed to receiving kind attention, she mistook his smile for ridicule, and her frustration grew. On the other hand, Chito couldn't help but find her even more endearing when she was angry. Amused by her misunderstanding, he let out a small laugh, which only made Tina angrier. Unable to understand the reason for his laughter, she glared at him. Moments later, their faces were unexpectedly close. Chito, captivated by her fiery gaze and striking features, found himself studying her deep, expressive eyes and her soft, red lips. Breaking the silence, Tina whispered something that Chito didn't expect. She quietly admitted that she had been the one to beat Bulu, but warned him that if he dared to tell anyone otherwise, especially if it damaged her sister's reputation, she wouldn't hesitate to deal with him as well. Despite her intimidating words, Chito couldn't help but notice her subtle, pleasant fragrance. Her closeness and confidence only made her more intriguing. He assured her that he had no intention of saying anything to anyone, secretly impressed by the way she fiercely protected her sister. Meanwhile, Sooty still felt uneasy about her actions. Bulu, who had finally managed to stand up, pointed at Tina and threatened her, vowing to tell their father about everything as soon as he returned from his business trip. He was convinced that his father would punish Tina severely for what she had done. His threats and whining became unbearable, and Chito, tired of listening, decided to put an end to it. With one sharp blow, he knocked Bulu to the ground again. Turning to Tina, he firmly stated that there was no need for her to worry, he had taken care of the problem. The girls were stunned by how effortlessly Chito subdued Bulu. They exchanged surprised glances, realizing that this day had been filled with an unusual number of fights. Chito, however, wasn't finished. He casually mentioned that he had used a memory loss spell on Bulu. Now, Bulu wouldn't remember anything that had happened or how he got his bruises and bumps. He would have to figure that out for himself. Hearing this, the girls couldn't help but laugh. The idea of Bulu looking at his reflection in complete confusion was amusing to them. When Bulu eventually regained consciousness, he clutched his head, complaining of a terrible headache. Disoriented, he ran to his mother, shouting about the pain, completely unaware of what had happened to him. The sisters and Chito laughed at the absurdity of it all. This chaotic series of events had unexpectedly brought the three of them closer together, marking the beginning of a new friendship between Tina, Sudi, and Chito. Chito seemed different from most boys the girls had met, and they thought he was wonderful. They praised him for using such a clever spell, expressing relief that the problem with Bulu had been solved so easily. Laughing together, the girls listened as Chito offered to teach them the spell in the future, explaining that it could come in handy sometimes. This light-hearted conversation marked the start of what appeared to be a blossoming friendship between the three children. Chito also pointed out that Tina had a unique affinity for reflex arc magic, something quite rare and powerful. Tina nodded absent-mindedly, but her expression shifted when she remembered Bulu's earlier remark about their father's return that evening. Both girls suddenly felt a mix of joy and nervousness. After all, the Duke of Cass had been absent for 7 long years, fighting in wars and achieving an unbroken string of victories. His triumphant return was a major event. The sisters were surprised, however, that Chito knew about it before they did. Tina tried to act as if she had known all along, spinning around as though she had simply forgotten the exact date. But deep down, she felt a pang of sadness. No one had told her. Everyone avoided her so thoroughly that they didn't think it was necessary to inform her of something so important. She felt like an outsider, as always. After saying goodbye to Chito, the girls hurried off to prepare for their father's arrival, their spirits lifted despite the bittersweet undertone. They had missed their father terribly during his years away. As he watched the sisters leave, Chito reflected on how unfair life had been to Tina. She was innocent, yet people hated and ignored her. No one had even bothered to share the news of her father's return, an event that should have been joyous for her as much as anyone else. The boy was glad he had befriended such sweet and sincere girls. They were easy to be around, and their company brought him genuine happiness. Chito couldn't help but feel drawn to Tina in particular. He couldn't understand why everyone else shunned her. To him, she seemed so special and undeserving of such cruelty. A few hours later, the sisters had transformed themselves into stunning young ladies. They wore elegant dresses and had styled each other's hair with great care. Tina, however, insisted on fastening a veil over her face, despite Sudi's protests. Her mood was cheerful, yet there was a lingering sadness. She knew that the butterfly mark on her face would undoubtedly stir gossip, as it always did. Though Tina had grown used to the whispers and stares, they still hurt her. Standing before the mirror, Tina adjusted her necklace, which perfectly matched the color of her eyes. She told herself that when her father saw her looking so beautiful, he would be proud and happy. Sudi, however, was worried. There was always a risk that Tina might not even be allowed into the palace. Once, long ago, the emperor had ordered her execution, and only their father's persistence had saved her life. Tina reassured her sister that worrying wouldn't change anything. She had long accepted that the world was against her, but she also believed with all her heart that Sudi and their father would always love and support her. That certainty gave her strength.
Tina had also learned an important truth: the more she hid from people, the more they believed she deserved to live in darkness, as if she were unworthy of the light. She wasn't the monster they thought her to be, and though she didn't believe in the prophecy about the reincarnation of the devil, she held on to the light in her heart. Despite everything, she tried to enjoy each day as it came. When the sisters finally arrived at the palace, they were met with hushed whispers and dirty gossip. Some pointed at Tina and muttered that she was the girl destined to be reborn as a devil. Others discussed the butterfly mark on her face, and a few men cruelly speculated that staring at her for too long might bring bad luck or unhappiness. Each word felt like a dagger to Tina's heart. Among the crowd, Bolu, still unrepentant and emboldened by his erased memory, shouted at Tina to leave, loudly declaring that she didn't belong there. Tina's heart ached, but she forced herself to remain composed. All she wanted was to see her father. But Bolu's insults were relentless, and his words grew harsher with each passing moment. Finally, Tina couldn't take it anymore. Rising from her seat, she marched over to Bolu and grabbed his hand tightly, demanding to know why he was so cruel to her. As her grip tightened, their eyes locked. Bolu, seething with anger, began to call her names publicly and threatened her with his fire magic. A flame ignited above his finger, and it was clear he was seconds away from attacking her. His gaze turned dark and stern, and the tension between them escalated. Sooty watched in fear, convinced that her sister was about to retaliate with magic, which would be disastrous in a crowded place like the palace. Sooty knew Tina's temper well and feared the consequences of her sister losing control. But Tina, ever resourceful, came up with a brilliant solution. She grabbed a nearby teapot filled with boiling water and poured it over the flame above Bolu's finger, extinguishing it instantly. The act was quick and decisive, and Sooty let out a sigh of relief. The scene was almost comical, as if Tina were teaching Bolu a lesson about handling fire with care. Tina felt proud of herself for holding back her magic. It was a victory in self-control, and she knew the situation could have ended much worse. Bolu, of course, was furious. He grumbled and cursed under his breath, while Sooty stood by, smiling with amusement. To an outsider, the moment might have seemed strange, but Sooty couldn't help feeling happy that her sister had resolved the issue so cleverly. Even though the situation wasn't funny at all, Sooty found it hard to contain her laughter. Unfortunately, the conflict wasn't entirely over. Bolu's anger ignited his fire magic again, flames swirling around him as he prepared to retaliate. He wanted to order what he considered a repulsive girl, as Tina had managed to resist him. Suddenly, Bolu felt an intense urge to fight with her. The reason for his overwhelming hatred was unclear. He had never liked her. Meg, Bolu's mother, stepped into the children's conversation, fully supporting her son. She firmly believed that Tina had no place there and looked at the girl with a head held high in disdain. Tina tried to calm herself down, reminding herself that the woman was much older, and one shouldn't retaliate against elders. She understood that Bolu's mother would always take her son's side. Then, an elderly woman, Bolu's grandmother, appeared. Muttering about the raised voices frightening the child, she began to approach Tina. Tina watched the old woman warily. In all her 7 years in this family, she had never seen her grandmother before, nor even known of her existence. The woman seemed kind and gentle, and Tina hoped she would stand up for her. However, to everyone's shock, the grandmother abruptly slapped Tina. The blow was painful, and caught off guard, Tina was unable to defend herself. She stumbled, hitting her head, overwhelmed by both pain and humiliation. It felt as if everyone wanted to harm or belittle her. The cursed butterfly on her face was the reason behind it all. People believed she was a demon. The old woman repeated words Tina had already heard that day, saying she should not have come here. It wasn't a direct threat, but it still stung. The grandmother also declared that people of low status should know their place. Tina couldn't bear such words. She stood up, trembling with frustration. How could a delicate little fairy like her be considered lowly? She grew anxious. Her father, whom she longed to see, had still not arrived. Just then, Sooty, her sister, rushed to her side, determined to defend her. Sooty insisted that Tina was not to blame, explaining that Bolu had been the first to use force. However, Meg yelled that Tina was a mere pleb and had no right to be there, insisting that Bulla was justified in using force shadow.
At that moment, Uncle Robert entered the hall.
He firmly declared that Tina was his elder brother's beloved daughter, not some lowly commoner. She was there at Kasa's request because the man wished to see his daughters first. Meg, however, had no interest in hearing such explanations. Furious that she had been kept in the dark about Tina's presence being mandatory, she snapped at Robert, ordering him to stay silent.
Robert then presented a letter proving that Kasa himself had summoned Tina.
Meg had never liked Robert, believing that without his father's reputation, he would have no standing at court. Years ago, during a battle, Robert's father had sacrificed his life to save the Duke of Kasa. From that moment on, Kasa had treated Robert like a younger brother.
Tina found herself fascinated by this revelation.
Now she understood why her little uncle was so determined to defend her.
Everything was starting to make sense. Just then, the Emperor and Empress entered the hall.
Seizing the moment, Bulla pointed at Tina and accused her of being a thief plotting to kill him. It was a blatant lie, but now the attention of the imperial family was fixed on her. The Emperor's family had arrived amidst the chaos, immediately hearing the shouts and arguments. This was no surprise, such behavior was common among these children.
The Empress observed the Duke's family and noted how unfriendly they seemed.
Perhaps if Kasa had been around more often, things would have been different. The Empress glanced at Tina with a look of fear, regretting that she had not been executed as a baby. Holding her son Shio's hand, she noticed that he had already realized Tina was being bullied again. Shio's gaze immediately fell on the wound on Tina's face, and he suspected Bulla was responsible.
Meanwhile, Bulu's grandmother approached the imperial family and bowed.
Without wasting time, she began boasting about her grandson, claiming that Bulla was highly skilled with a sword and eager to demonstrate his abilities.
Bulu, excited to show off, flexed his muscles and twirled his arms in an exaggerated display. He believed everyone should witness his strength. However, the Empress was unimpressed by his antics.
To her, he seemed nothing more than an arrogant show-off.
She believed he wasn't even worth her son's little finger.
Though she remained silent, she discreetly observed as a boy wielding a sword jumped into the center of the hall.
Tina felt ashamed and disgusted by the family she was surrounded by. Her father had not yet returned, yet her grandmother was already singing Bulu's praises, boasting about his skills.
The imperial family remained silent, only out of respect for Kasa. This was meant to be a grand banquet in honor of her father, but instead, the family had turned it into a gathering of fools. Their behavior could have been more appropriate, considering this event was not for them.
Bulu, however, seemed unsatisfied. He was desperate to stand out and prove himself superior to Tina.
Why he had chosen her specifically was unclear, but it seemed he was afraid of losing if he faced a stronger opponent. Determined to show off his flawless swordsmanship, he called Tina forward to fight him. He grumbled arrogantly, claiming that he had been made a laughingstock before and now wanted to redeem himself. Tina, placing her hands on her hips, accepted his challenge without hesitation. She even promised that she would spank him so hard he'd be crying for his mother. Amused by the situation, Shio turned to his father and requested wooden swords for the match. With a nod of approval, his father agreed. Shio was concerned about Tina. If she used magic in front of such a large audience, she could seriously injure Bulu. He wholeheartedly hoped for her victory, believing that Bulu's defeat would serve as a valuable lesson and put an end to his boasting. As the match began, the participants gripped their wooden swords.
The onlookers stood up and moved closer, eager to witness the fight. Most of them cheered for Bulu, still convinced that Tina was a demon.
Meanwhile, Sudi, although nervous, supported her sister. She worried that if Tina lost control of her emotions, she might accidentally use magic. If that happened, the most important thing would be ensuring that no one noticed.
Tina struck first, landing a successful blow.
If she continued at this pace, victory would be hers. She was skilled with a sword. It wasn't her first time fighting. Sudi watched with pride, pleased with how the battle was unfolding. Standing beside Shio, she chatted with him as they observed Tina's impressive technique.
Shio admired her swift and well-executed strikes.
However, Sudi was anxious about how their grandmother would react if Tina won. She likely wouldn't take it well. Sensing her concern, Shio reassured her, promising that if anything went wrong, he would be there to protect Tina. He wouldn't let anyone harm her. Tina was an exceptional fighter, every strike she delivered was precise. Meanwhile, Bolo grew increasingly anxious about his reputation. He couldn't bear the thought of losing, especially to a girl. Then, suddenly, Tina stopped. If she won, Bulu's mother and grandmother would never accept it, and by the time her father arrived, the banquet in his honor would be completely ruined. Realizing this, Tina made a bold decision: she would let herself lose. Determined to endure the pain, she remained still as Bulu, undeterred, struck her. She felt a sting and fell to the floor. Suri and Shio watched in confusion, unable to understand why Tina had stopped fighting and allowed Bulu to land a hit. It was clear she had done it on purpose. As if reading her sister's thoughts, Tina, in a final act of defiance, intentionally kicked Shio in the head while falling, her small, playful revenge. She wanted to win, but this wasn't the time. Moments later, she found herself in her father's arms. A wave of joy washed over her, this long-awaited reunion had finally happened. Overcome with emotion, she hugged him tightly and kissed his cheek. Kasa, her father, turned a menacing gaze toward Bulu. His expression was intimidating, and Bulu, frightened, ran to his mother and grandmother in tears, a clear footprint from Tina visible on his cheek. Tina barely remembered her father's face, it had been so long since she last saw him. Now, as she looked at him, she realized he was a strikingly handsome man. In his presence, she felt safe, as if nothing could harm her. Kasa then approached the emperor and empress, apologizing for his late arrival. He was pleased to see that everyone had been waiting for him and had prepared so well. Holding his precious daughter close, he felt a deep sense of happiness. Tina had grown so much, becoming a strong and mature young girl. Yet, a lingering concern remained: had she been mistreated during his absence? The emperor, glad to see the duke, congratulated him on his victory. This day was meant to honor him. As a gesture of hospitality, the emperor invited him to join the banquet and enjoy the carefully prepared dishes. Meanwhile, Suri had already rushed to her father's side. The reunited family sat together, eating and laughing. The girls were eager to share everything on their minds, excited to finally talk to their father. As the empress observed the duke and his daughters, she found herself fond of them. She had long believed that Tina was a kind and lovely girl, and an idea began forming in her mind: she wanted to arrange a marriage between Tina and her son. The duke, however, was caught off guard by such a proposal. Fresh from the battlefield, he hadn't expected to hear something so unexpected, at least not today. Suri, on the other hand, glanced at Shio and, after a moment of thought, wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Lately, she and Shio had grown quite close, and she had to admit he was rather handsome. Suri had no objections to the boy. Upon hearing the empress's proposal, the grandmother immediately noted that it was a great honor for their family and an excellent idea. The empress then firmly decided that this was how it would be. However, Kasa abruptly stood up from the table, his voice firm and resolute as he declared that this marriage should not happen. Outraged, he refused to allow anyone else to make such an important decision for his daughter. He made his stance clear: arranged marriages were not something he believed in for his family. Ignoring a child's opinion and imposing decisions on them was unacceptable. The empress was taken aback by his response. Did this mean that her son was not worthy of Kasa's daughter? Any noble family would consider it a dream to be connected to the imperial family, apparently, everyone except the duke. Kasa stood his ground, stating that his daughter would choose her own husband in the future. He then added that he was exhausted and bid farewell to the imperial family. It had been mere moments since he entered the banquet, and he had already discovered that one of his daughters had nearly been beaten while the other was being married off without his consent. He had no intention of tolerating such treatment. As Kasa turned to leave, the grandmother called out to him, wanting to speak, but he acted as if he hadn't heard her. He had no desire to discuss the matter further. His daughter's future was his family's decision alone. The empress, watching him walk away, felt her respect for the Duke of Kasa diminish. To her, he was an ungrateful and ill-mannered man. Instead of offering thanks, he had shown only discontent. Outside, in the palace courtyard, Kasa gazed at his daughters with admiration. Dressed in their elegant attire, they looked especially beautiful that night. The butterfly mark on Tina's face made her appearance even more striking. Sooty, looking around, wondered if they were really just going to leave like this. The mood in the palace had turned tense, and many people seemed displeased. Kasa, however, was unfazed by the opinions of others. His focus was solely on his daughters. Tina believed her father had actually done the Empress a favor by not losing his temper immediately. Sooty was still so young, and yet they were already trying to marry her off. It was, in simple terms, a complete disregard for human decency and morality. Kasa chuckled as he realized that Tina's personality was strikingly similar to his own. He then turned to his daughters and asked how they had been living without him, whether anyone had mistreated them. Gently tugging at Tina's cheek, he smiled at her. No matter how angry she was, she still looked adorable with her round, rosy cheeks. His heart melted with affection for his daughters. He patted their heads and reassured them that as long as he was around, no one would dare to harm them. Those words, so simple yet so powerful, were exactly what the girls had longed to hear. This strong and seemingly invincible man, known for his toughness, had a heart that overflowed with love for his children. The girls finally felt the warmth and security they had been missing. Suddenly, voices echoed from the garden. A man and a woman were speaking about Tina. The man sneered, saying that she wasn't a proper lady at all, but something sinister. He was certain that sooner or later, the Duke's family would fall apart because of her. The woman added that if it weren't for the Duke's protection, the Empress would have cast Tina out long ago. Kasa, upon hearing such vile gossip, could no longer contain his anger. This had gone too far. Without hesitation, he used soundproofing magic on his daughters. He didn't want them to hear the ugly words that were about to be exchanged. It became clear to him that such rumors must be a constant occurrence here. But now that he was present, he would not allow this to continue. Stepping toward the gossiping pair, Kasa's presence sent a wave of fear through them. They suddenly realized they were not alone. The woman stood frozen, her face pale with terror. The man, pretending he had said nothing, remained silent. Gathering his power, Kasa was furious. How dare they speak so cruelly about his daughter? His gaze darkened as he issued a menacing threat. If they ever dared to say such things again, he would not spare them. His sheer presence exuded authority and power, making the two young nobles tremble. Tina, meanwhile, was beyond thrilled. Her father wasn't just powerful, he was super mega ultra handsome. A man who was completely, undeniably in love with his daughter. Sooty, however, felt a bit intimidated by the fiery rage in her father's eyes. She had never seen him this angry before. The man and woman collapsed onto the grass, trembling with fear. Slowly, they rose to their feet, but they dared not move. To them, Kasa appeared merciless, a force they could not defy. The Duke, his voice low and dangerous, asked if they now understood how to behave. They couldn't even form a response, only frantically nodded in agreement. Tina was suddenly overwhelmed by emotions she didn't quite understand. Tears welled up in her eyes, much to her own surprise. Kasa looked at his daughter and saw not just a girl who had been labeled a demon but a sensitive child who had endured so much. She was just an innocent girl, wrongly mistreated by others. His heart ached with guilt. Kneeling before Tina, he gently asked for her forgiveness for not being there all these years, for allowing others to mistreat her. His absence had given people the freedom to act as they pleased, with no regard for her feelings. Despite everything, Tina had done her best to enjoy life. A bright, happy smile spread across her face as she reassured her father that Sooty had always been there to protect her. Kasa then called Sooty over and embraced both of his daughters. They laughed, talked, and rejoiced in their reunion. As they sat together, Kasa began sharing stories of his adventures in the north, telling them about the responsibilities that came with his position. For the first time in a long while, the girls felt at peace, wrapped in the love and protection of their father. The girls listened intently, their faces full of joy as they hugged their father. Each new story he told seemed magical to them. To them, the Duke was a true hero, a man of incredible strength and power. As he held his daughters close, he couldn't help but express how wonderful they were. His two little treasures hung onto every word, interrupting excitedly with questions, eager to know every detail. In return, he asked about their lives, wanting to hear everything. Every day, he had woken up thinking about them, longing to be with them. The girls took turns sharing funny stories from their daily lives, laughing together. But in the midst of their conversation, Tina suddenly noticed a wound on her father's hand, a deep scar from the battlefield. Both she and Sooty felt a pang of sadness for him. However, their father turned it into a light-hearted story, making it sound as if he had been fighting cartoon villains rather than real enemies. The girls also spoke about their new friends and how their days had been filled with joy and carefree moments. In reality, Tina carried a deep sadness within her, but she refused to let it show. She didn't want to burden her father with her worries. Tina, who was quite skilled at drawing, suddenly had an idea. She picked up a pen and began sketching on her father's hand, stroke by stroke. She planned to draw patterns over his scar, hoping to make it look less intimidating. Casa watched with curiosity, then made a request. He wanted the same butterfly design that Tina had on her face. He saw it as a mark of beauty, a precious gift. Tina hesitated. People feared the butterfly symbol, associating it with the reincarnation of a demon. If her father bore the same mark, he too would be shunned. But Casa didn't care about the opinions of others. Tina smiled at his determination. She liked that he shared her sense of aesthetics. With renewed enthusiasm, she continued drawing, carefully tracing every line. Casa was amazed by his daughter's resilience. Despite all the hardships she had endured, she continued to smile, finding happiness wherever she could. She was even stronger than he had imagined, and he felt immense pride that she was his daughter. As he watched her work, admiration filled his heart. She had been through so much, so many insults, so much undeserved suffering. His chest tightened with emotion. He tried to hold back tears but silently asked for Yossi's forgiveness. If she were still alive and knew what had happened, she would surely. Sooty, meanwhile, observed her father and Tina, feeling a deep sense of pride. Their father ignored all the rumors, loving them unconditionally. That was all that mattered. Tina finally finished the drawing. She was pleased that she had managed to cover his scar, if only a little. Just as they were enjoying the moment, a servant suddenly ran in, frantically calling for help. Robert had collapsed. Casa was immediately on high alert. Without hesitation, he rushed to help. When they arrived, Robert was lying on the bed, barely breathing. The Duke of Casa questioned the servants, demanding to know what had happened. To him, Robert was like a younger brother, and no matter what, he would do everything in his power to save him. Worriedly, Casa asked if a healer had been summoned. The maid explained that Robert had taken his usual medicine. He had always been in poor health, frequently coughing up blood. The healer arrived swiftly, examining the boy before delivering grim news. It was a congenital illness, an incurable condition. The only option was to continue taking daily medicine to manage his symptoms. Casa was stunned. He had never heard of Robert having such an illness before. Shock quickly turned into anger. Why had no one properly treated the boy? Robert slowly opened his eyes and, despite his weakness, smiled. He was happy that Casa had come to see him. A violent cough racked his body, making his condition painfully obvious. Tina, feeling deeply sorry for him, hugged Robert and wished him a speedy recovery. He had always stood up for her, and she wanted to do something for him in return. However, in Tina's eyes, Robert looked too fragile. As the heir of his family, he shouldn't be this weak. Determined to help, she began thinking of ways to find a skilled healer who could provide the right medicine. Casa, too, was lost in thought. He remembered Robert's father, the man who had bravely sacrificed himself to save him. The memory warmed his heart, but it also strengthened his resolve. He could not let Robert die. He owed his very life to the boy's father. Turning his back on Robert now would be unthinkable. To lighten the mood, Casa suddenly began performing silly hand tricks, an old habit from his days in the barracks. Everyone burst into laughter at how ridiculous he looked. Tina, wanting to encourage Robert, joined in. However, Robert clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. Concerned, Tina quickly brought him a glass of water to help. Just then, Sooty arrived from the kitchen, carrying a tray of food. It was all of Robert's favorite dishes. He needed to eat well to regain his strength. The food looked delicious, and Tina curiously wondered what her uncle's favorite meal was. Gently, she placed a pillow behind Robert's back to make him more comfortable. Robert, grateful for the care and attention, felt comforted. He truly hoped he would recover soon. However, when he took his first bite, the food was not what Tina had expected. It was ginseng with radish, tofu with honey, and several other bizarre combinations. The ingredients seemed completely mismatched. Tina was puzzled. Why had the kitchen staff prepared such an odd meal? Did Robert actually like this kind of food? To her surprise, Robert ate with enthusiasm, savoring every bite. Apparently, this strange mixture suited his taste. His appearance even seemed to improve, his cheeks gained a bit of color. Feeling better, Robert smiled and offered Tina a taste of his meal. Tina, however, stared silently at the food he held out to her. She couldn't believe it, this man was not just a little older than her. He was a whole generation ahead of her in terms of taste. Since he was now officially her uncle, she figured she didn't need to be too polite. For his own good, she wanted to make him spit that strange food out immediately. The girl placed her hand on Robert's back and used her magic. Tina hadn't anticipated such a reaction, this wasn't part of her plan. Suddenly, Robert began vomiting, but this time, it was blood. The sight was both eerie and revolting. Everyone present was shocked, especially since they believed the boy had already recovered. Regret washed over Tina, she had no idea this could happen. Carefully, she handed Robert a glass of water and some medicine. By now, everyone at the table had lost their appetite. Robert, feeling embarrassed by what had just happened, didn't understand how it occurred so suddenly. Trying to reassure everyone, he insisted he was fine and urged them to continue eating without worrying about him. Duke Quesa, however, was furious. He abruptly snatched Robert's plate and threw it to the floor. Robert, startled and confused, stared at the Duke, not comprehending why his food was being discarded. He had found the meal delicious and wasn't even finished. But Quesa was convinced that the food was so terrible it had poisoned the boy. In a sudden burst of rage, the Duke overturned the entire table, sending all the food crashing to the floor. The children, terrified, watched in silence. Their father's actions were beyond shocking. The Duke's outburst seemed excessive, even cruel. His years of hardship had shaped him into an unyielding man, but his behavior now seemed utterly unreasonable. Scattered food and shattered plates littered the floor as the girls exchanged uneasy glances, unable to understand why he had caused such chaos. Announcing that he would return shortly, the Duke stormed off, leaving the children bewildered about what he was planning next. Meanwhile, a servant, who had been secretly observing the scene, quickly informed Boo that his uncle had just overturned Robert's dinner table. Boo burst into laughter, finding the situation highly amusing. Mocking Robert, he shouted that this was exactly what the boy deserved. Boo, who always carried an air of superiority, believed Robert was unworthy and fit only to eat scraps. A few minutes later, the Duke returned, now dressed as if he were a chef. He carried steaming plates of food, much to the surprise of his daughters and Robert. His attire was rather ridiculous, he wore a children's apron adorned with animal prints. Offering the children a meal he had personally prepared, he expected them to appreciate his effort. However, their reaction was far from enthusiastic. Disheartened by their lack of excitement, the Duke's expression fell. Although the children didn't find the food appealing, none of them wanted to hurt his feelings. Sway believed that if they refused to eat, their father would become angry. Reluctantly, they approached the table but delayed taking a bite as much as possible. Tina outright refused, explaining that while she loved her father, she simply couldn't eat what he had cooked. Though visibly disappointed, the Duke remained silent. Sway and Robert hesitated, fearing what the food might taste like. It didn't look appetizing at all. The children sat quietly, prolonging the inevitable. Despite everything, the girls gazed at their father with affection, recognizing his attempt to make them happy. Robert was taken aback by this new side of his brother, usually stern and ruthless. The Duke now appeared almost childlike in front of his daughters. Undeterred, the Duke sat down and began eating, seemingly pleased with his culinary skills. He even decided that, from now on, he would cook for the children more often. However, the children remained uneasy, as the food emitted a foul odor. Wanting to maintain harmony, Robert convinced himself to take a bite. Sometimes, sacrifices had to be made. The girls watched him with wide eyes, concerned for his well-being.
Smiling nervously, they considered Robert a true hero.
Tina, half-jokingly, even mentally bid him farewell but gave him a thumbs-up, curious to see how the tasting would end. Robert feared that eating this meal might be the end of him. If he had known this would happen, he would have simply eaten the original food without hesitation. Accepting that the girls wouldn't touch the food, the Duke placed a hand on Robert's head and wished him luck, failing to understand why his daughters were rejecting such a delicious meal. He was convinced they simply didn't appreciate his good intentions. Determined, Kwesa decided that while he was on vacation, he would personally take responsibility for Robert's meals, ensuring the boy ate nutritious and hearty food. After all, he had once insisted on bringing Robert into the family, despite the boy not being of his blood. Tina urged Robert to eat faster, wanting to appear as a caring and dutiful niece in her father's eyes. Meanwhile, the Duke reflected on the past 7 years, how he had fought on the borders to protect Tina's life, only to later realize that her existence had been far from easy. To the children's astonishment, the Duke suddenly announced from the middle of the kitchen that, from now on, he would cook for them himself. However, a voice from outside the door loudly remarked that the food smelled awful. For the Duke, those words felt like an arrow to the heart. Bulu's words deeply wounded the Duke. He had put his heart into cooking, yet some brat had the audacity to criticize him. Without hesitation, the Duke opened the door and invited Bulu into the room. With a friendly demeanor, he offered the boy a chance to taste his masterpiece. Then, without waiting for consent, he forcefully seated Bulu in a chair and placed a plate before him. Without warning, Duke Kwesa skewered a piece of meat onto a fork and swiftly shoved it into Bulu's mouth. The boy, his expression strained, mumbled that it was delicious while covering his mouth with his hand. Watching this, Tina whispered that her brother was doing well and urged him to finish the meal quickly. The Duke, convinced of his own culinary talent, suggested that Bulu eat the entire plate before being allowed to leave. He simply couldn't understand why the child had earlier claimed the food was awful. In his mind, this was a dish made with love, a meal prepared by a father for his children. It had to be delicious. Tina, however, was taken aback by her father's unwavering confidence. He genuinely believed Bulu's forced compliment, not realizing it was spoken out of politeness and fear. The Duke's stern gaze had left the boy with no other choice. Sui, on the other hand, was puzzled by her sister's disdainful look toward their father. As for Bulu, his pained expression said it all. This meal was anything but delicious. Struggling, he forced down each bite, his discomfort apparent. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, he bolted to the side and began to vomit. Robert clutched his head, relieved that he hadn't yet taken a bite. The girls, meanwhile, giggled at the situation. The Duke, witnessing Bulu's reaction, finally came to a realization: perhaps his masterpieces weren't quite edible after all. He let out a disappointed sigh. He had truly wanted to please everyone and felt like a real chef, but it was clear now that his cooking skills were far from great. It was unanimously decided they needed to hire a proper cook. The children, feeling victorious, breathed a sigh of relief, knowing they had narrowly escaped the ordeal. Only Bulu had suffered. Later that night, when the girls were already fast asleep, the Duke quietly entered their room to check on them. They were still so small, so fragile. As he gazed at them, he noticed Tina's unusual sleeping position. She looked just like a baby. Smiling fondly, he gently pulled the blanket over them and wished them a good night. Overcome with affection, he decided to sleep beside them for a while. Suddenly, in the midst of her dreams, Tina began mumbling harsh words. Startled, the Duke jumped out of bed. He had no intention of getting hit by his own child. Before he could react, Tina swung her fist and smacked her sister in the head in her sleep. The Duke was amazed. How did Sui manage to sleep next to her sister all this time? He watched in disbelief, realizing they would definitely need separate beds. Sui only murmured a weak complaint about the pain before dozing off again. The next morning, Tina bluntly told her father that his food was inedible, and at night, she unknowingly assaulted her own sister. The Duke felt it was only fair to teach his mischievous daughter a lesson. He intended to pinch her, just enough to make her understand not to mistreat her sister. But as he looked at her peaceful, sleeping face, his heart softened. Instead of punishing her, he simply stroked her hair, thinking to himself that she hadn't done it out of malice. Then, all of a sudden, Tina awoke and clutched her head, as if she had just had a terrible nightmare. Without hesitation, the Duke wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. In a quiet, reassuring voice, he whispered that he would always be there for her, no matter what happened. Meanwhile, outside the palace, a magician stood, peering intently into his magic ball. His expression grew troubled. Without wasting another moment, he hurried off to see the Empress. Apparently, all previous theories about the reincarnations of witches had been false. Bowing before the Empress, the magician anxiously delivered his message. A girl had appeared who possessed the power to take control of the Ghana Empire.
A regal woman with blonde hair questions if another can truly bring prosperity to the empire. An elderly minister with long white hair tearfully admits he has not yet figured out the answer. The blonde woman smirks, deciding that with an uncertain future, it's easier to simply brand the girl as bad luck. The minister protests, asking the blonde woman what will happen if the child actually brings good luck. The queen scoffs at the idea of good luck, claiming any fortune in the Ghana Empire is her own doing, not a little girl's. The elderly minister feigns ignorance, declaring himself a foolish man who cannot comprehend the queen's words. The queen beckons the minister closer, whispering something that makes his face fall in horror. Later, the minister walks alone down a dark hall, reflecting on the fate of that girl. He foresees two paths, one where the girl's power could overthrow the dynasty, destroying the kingdom, and another where she could use that same power to save everyone, her choice sealing their fate. The minister clutches his head in despair, believing the queen's plan is far too cruel. A dark-haired man with glasses watches his master, wondering why he is out so late, and if he just insulted the queen. He worries aloud, questioning if the queen intends to harm the duke's two daughters once again. A pink-haired girl named Tina asks her blonde-haired father if he will be with her and her sister forever, and he promises he will. Crying, Tina confesses she just had a terrible dream that he died a miserable death. Her father comforts her, tucking her into bed and promising to stay with her so she won't have any more nightmares. Tina sniffles and agrees, still looking deeply worried. The father sleeps between his two daughters, but Tina remains awake, her expression troubled. Tina watches her sleeping father, thinking that her dreams, though rare, have always come true. As tears fall, a red butterfly mark glows on her cheek. She silently begs her father not to die in 3 years as she dreamt. A small blonde boy, her brother, wakes up and tells Tina that if she doesn't stop thinking and go to sleep, he'll cook for her. Tina gently touches her father's face, quietly urging him to sleep. She tries to convince herself that dreams are the opposite of reality, resigning herself to her father's fate. Elsewhere, a woman in a red dress complains to her mother that a girl named Bruce nearly made her die from sickness. The woman in red fumes, angry that Casa took the girl out, and fears that such a scourge will bring ruin to their family. The elderly woman sharply cuts her off, demanding silence. The woman in red flinches, stammering an apology to her mother. The elderly woman calmly states that Casa is stubborn and will protect the girl well. Looking out the window, the elderly woman muses that after 7 years, it's time to find a new partner for Casa. The woman in red smiles slyly, immediately volunteering to arrange it. She inwardly sees that Casa wants to remarry, fearing that if he has a son, her own son, Blue, will lose his chance. As she thinks this, the elderly woman smirks, confirming that Blue will indeed have no chance of inheriting the title of Duke. Out in a beautiful city, Tina is overjoyed, marveling that this is her first time seeing such a beautiful world. She excitedly calls out to her sister Suti and her daddy, pointing at a toy shop window. Tina tugs on her father Casa's cape, asking if they can go to the shop. Casa beams with joy and lifts both of his daughters into his arms, happily heading towards the shop. Suti, the blonde daughter, worries that her sister Tina is out without a veil, and their father didn't even notice. She grows more anxious, fearing someone might recognize Tina and know the legend of the demon's daughter. Suti watches with concern as her sister runs ahead without a care. Tina happily selects a stuffed lion for someone named Dis, and an ugly turtle she plans to give to someone named Brew. Seeing her sister's pure joy, Suti decides not to spoil the rare outing. Casa watches his daughters, filled with resolve, thinking that no matter what, he will always protect them. Tina is ecstatic, pointing out beautiful flowers and a dress perfect for her sister. Casa, overjoyed to spoil his daughters, throws his hands up and cheers. Bye! Bye! Buy! He pulls out a red pouch of coins, ready to purchase whatever his daughters desire. A group of women nearby gossip about the handsome rich man, debating whether the two children are his or her relatives. Tina notices the women and dryly comments that her stinky daddy's love interests have arrived, leaving Suti confused. Just then, a young woman with short gray hair deliberately trips, falling dramatically into Kasa's arms, holding a massive bouquet of red roses. The woman looks up at Kasa and confesses she likes him. Kasa looks away with a stoic expression, thinking to himself that in the end it must be him. A well-dressed woman with light brown hair and a green hat confidently propositions Kasa, asking if he's interested. Kasa bluntly rejects her with a single word, leaving the woman shocked and speechless. To his dismay, the woman and her friends are even more smitten, finding his cold rejection cool. The crowd of adoring women swarms Kasa, begging for his attention, but he remains unimpressed. Tina watches the spectacle, dryly wondering to herself if her stinky daddy is truly so charming. Suddenly, a blindfolded Suti cries out for her sister Tina as she trips and begins to fall. Kasa yells a warning and lunges through the crowd to catch his falling daughter. As the chaos unfolds, a hand suddenly grabs Tina's shoulder from behind. Ooh! A cloaked figure with long blonde hair ambushes Tina, silencing her as she's taken by surprise. The scene shifts to a peaceful riverside, where the cloaked figure now confronts a terrified Tina. With a scream of, "Die!" the assailant shoves Tina toward the sparkling water. As she plummets, Tina realizes with horror that whatever she was fed has sealed her magic. Cough. Struggling to stay afloat, Tina cries for help and wonders if she is fated to die again. The cloaked figure watches impassively from the riverbank as Tina disappears beneath the surface. Back in the city, Suti is horrified to learn her sister has been kidnapped. Overwhelmed with guilt, Suti tearfully blames herself for Tina being put in danger. Kasa looks upon his distraught daughter, his thoughts turning grimly toward the child. Kneeling, Kasa comforts Suti, promising her that he will ensure Tina is brought back safely. Suti looks up at her father with tear-filled eyes, lamenting that she failed to protect her sister. Kasa firmly tells Suti that this is the fault of the wicked people who attacked, not her. He gently pats her head, explaining that the culprits would have found another way to strike regardless. With renewed determination, Kasa declares, "Let's go," and strides forward with Suti following. His resolve firm, Kasa leads the way to begin the search for his daughter. Suti watches him go, her face a mask of worry as she tearfully whispers, "Father?" Elsewhere, the minister's aide reports to a man with long, light blue hair that Duke Kasa has mobilized the city guards. A woman with light brown hair and wing like hairpins adds that Kasa is disrespecting His Majesty. The blue-haired man smiles, dismissing the concern by noting it's human nature for Kasa to dote on his daughter. He orders his aide to dispatch another squad to assist in the search, and the aide quickly agrees. Turning to the woman, the blue-haired man says it's time for them to go see someone named Wayne. The woman agrees, but privately she fumes that His Majesty is too trusting and resolves to plan for Wayne's future herself. The memory of drowning resurfaces as Tina curses her fate, refusing to accept this end. The scene shifts dramatically to a rainy night in a modern city. On a rooftop, a pink-haired woman named Jiu Xiang begs a man named Qin Shou to deny what she sees before her. Clutching a knife, she tearfully pleads with him, saying she will believe him if he just tells her it's a lie. A blonde woman standing with Qin Shou laughs, mockingly asking Jiu Xiang why she's still so naive. The blonde woman's cruel laughter continues as she belittles Jiu Xiang's desperate hope. She then taunts Jiu Xiang, offering to reveal what she and Qin Shou were doing naked in bed together. The blonde's question hangs in the air, leaving a heartbroken Jiu Xiang speechless. The blonde woman lands the final blow, laughing as she confesses they were having an affair and murdered Jiu Xiang's father. Struck by lightning and betrayal, Jiu Xiang whispers in disbelief as the blonde woman's hand reaches for her. Jiu Xiang cries out in anguish, questioning why those she loves so humbly are hurting her so deeply. A surge of defiance courses through her as she fights back, refusing to die like this. Grab her hand is caught, and as she dangles over the edge, Qin Shou screams her name. Qin Shou desperately tries to separate the two women, yelling for Jiu Xiang to let go of her attacker. The struggle intensifies as Jiu Xiang clings tightly, determined to take her betrayer down with her. Screaming with rage and sorrow, Jiu Xiang vows to drag the two dogs who killed her father to hell. As she falls, she laments her own weakness, realizing too late the true faces of the two scoundrels. Her regret is not for her own death, but for the fate of her beloved father. Sinking into the abyss, she seethes with hatred for the two people who destroyed everything she loved. In her final thoughts, Ji Yuxiang makes a solemn vow to be strong and protect her father if she gets another chance at life. With a final splash, Tina is pulled into a watery vortex, her hands slipping beneath the surface. Suddenly, a black-haired boy with red eyes appears on the shore, his hand glowing with blue energy as he reacts in shock. The boy pulls an unconscious Tina from the water, crying out, "Miss Tina!" in disbelief. He quickly uses healing magic on her, desperately urging her to wake up. Tina sputters back to life, tears streaming down her face as she coughs up water. Enraged, she grabs the startled boy by his collar, threatening to beat the scumbag to death. Realizing her mistake, Tina apologizes to the bruised boy, admitting she didn't know he was Prince Chiduo. Prince Chiduo tells her that if it helps, she can hit him to vent her anger. He agrees to let her hit him, but declares he will hit her back, leaving Tina flabbergasted by his pettiness. He gives her a light tap on the head. She flinches, then asks him to be a little more gentle. After another soft touch, Prince Chiduo smiles, announcing that he's done hitting her. A confused Tina touches her head, bewildered as she asks, "That's it?" Prince Chiduo suggests they leave, reminding her that her father and the others must be worried. Tina happily agrees but suddenly shouts, "Look!" stopping them both in their tracks. They turn to see people on the riverbank pointing at the water in alarm. Tina covers her mouth in horror, seeing the cause of the commotion. The river's surface is now covered with dead fish, shocking both her and Prince Chiduo. The terrified crowd calls it a bad omen as a man points. Recognizing Tina, the crowd identifies her as the demon's reincarnation, citing the butterfly mark on her face as proof. The people recount in fear how the fish died after she fell in, resolving that she cannot be allowed to stay. Tina desperately tries to deny their accusations, terrified by the hatred in their eyes. Prince Chiduo takes her hand firmly, telling her not to be afraid. Tina looks up at Chiduo, finding a moment of comfort in his reassuring gesture. Splat Tomato suddenly flies from the crowd, hitting Chiduo squarely on the head. The enraged mob screams for them to be driven away. Chiduo calmly states he's fine, prompting a smiling Tina to suggest they run. He watches her, wondering if her bright smile is just an act to keep him from feeling sad. Overwhelmed with empathy, Chiduo cries internally, lamenting the hardship she must have endured because of the prophecy. Taking her hand, he smiles brightly and says, "Let's go." They flee together, leaving the furious, fist-pumping crowd behind them. As they run, Tina suspects the crowd's sudden turn was manipulated and wonders who is behind it. A flash of memory reveals the sinister smile of her cloaked attacker, and Tina realizes with certainty it's him. Elsewhere, Suti questions her father Kasa, finding their search method for Tina to be inefficient. Kasa's expression darkens as Suti worriedly calls out to him. He kneels to her level, affectionately asking his precious daughter what's on her mind. Suti wonders why her father seems so calm, questioning if his men have already found Tina. Kasa offers to carry a tired Suti, who gratefully accepts. Suti remains suspicious, noting that no messengers have arrived and pondering if they have a special communication method. Hushing her father, Suti spots a strange green beetle on his ear, wondering if it's a listening device. Kasa asks why she's staring, while Suti internally worries about her sister Tina. He smiles, assuring her that he's worried too, and that she and Tina are his most precious treasures. The beetle on his ear flashes red, and Kasa's demeanor instantly turns grim. Held in her father's arms, Suti senses the change, and asks with alarm if Tina is in danger. Kasa is stunned, realizing Suti's ability to see the bug means she may have a powerful magic talent. As a storm breaks, Kasa runs through the rain-soaked city streets with Suti in his arms. Suti feels a drop of water on her hand and looks up, asking if it is raining. Looking at the sudden downpour, Kasa's face fills with dawning horror. He remembers the angry mob, shouting to drive Tina and the prince out of the village. As lightning flashes, Prince Chiduo desperately tells Tina they have to run, because it's about to rain. Tina looks up at the gathering storm clouds, confused as to when they appeared. Tina walks with Prince Chiduo, thinking to herself that everything about today feels very wrong. As rain begins to fall, Prince Chiduo holds Tina, telling her not to worry about the clouds for now. Tina asks what this is, and Chiduo explains it's a magic raincoat, but its limited power means they must find shelter quickly. Agreeing, Tina affectionately pats Chiduo's head, saying it's understandable his ability is limited since he's still a cub. In the pouring rain, the villagers from the mob scream in agony, clutching their faces in hands. Within a golden shield, a voice wonders what is happening. The crowd writhes in pain as Tina realizes with alarm that this rain is definitely wrong. Tina and Prince Chiduo stand together inside his protective shield, watching the chaotic scene unfold. Prince Chiduo turns to Tina, asking her what she plans to do. With a determined smile, Tina declares she will save them, but Chiduo questions her, reminding her how they just hurt her. Tina insists that the villagers are innocent, and not the ones who truly want to harm her. Chiduo retorts that they are not innocent, calling them ignorant, arrogant, and cold-blooded. He warns that they threw tomatoes this time, but who knows what they'll do next, adding that his power can only protect her. As a man writhes on the ground, crying for help, Tina watches, horrified by the pain the acid rain is causing. Tina realizes in shock that it's acid rain, and questions why this is happening. An old woman, her skin burned, grabs Tina's arm and accuses her of being a demon who brought this disaster. As the woman's hand slips, Tina desperately denies the accusation. The old woman collapses, and Tina looks down as a magical glow emanates from her own hands. Tina heroically orders those who can move to find shelter and the rest to protect themselves, promising she will save them. Floating into the air, surrounded by blue energy, Tina resolves to use her magic to save people, even if it exposes her. Prince Chiduo watches in astonishment, questioning her power before realizing with horror that he cannot let her use it. He yells for Sister Tina to stop, fearing that her actions will solidify the prophecy of the demon's reincarnation. Chiduo reaches out, desperately trying to stop her from using her magic and being hated by the entire world. Suddenly, Kasa appears holding Suti under an umbrella, calling Tina's name as she turns in surprise. With tears in her eyes, Tina tells her father that the people are in pain and she wants to help them. Kasa looks down at Tina, holding Suti close, and gently calls her a silly child. Scooping Tina into his arms, Kasa says a little child like her shouldn't have to shoulder such a heavy burden. Tina tries to protest, but Suti confidently tells her sister to trust in their father. Kasa unleashes a powerful torrent of fire, vowing to see who dares to harm the people of his empire. The fiery tendrils of Kasa's magic spread throughout the forest, dispelling the acid rain. Healed and safe, the villagers look up in relieved disbelief, murmuring that they have been saved. Kasa stands with his daughters as a cloaked blonde figure retreats into the woods, clutching a wounded arm. As the cloaked figure flees, Tina spots them and shouts, "Daddy!" It's him. Kasa smiles, praising his little girl for her keen observation skills. Kasa taunts the attacker to reveal themselves and unleashes a ball of magic, causing the fleeing figure to curse in alarm. ZZZT. The cloaked figure is engulfed in blue energy, screaming a final vow of love to the Empress as they disintegrate. Kasa watches the last specks of dark energy fade away, coolly wondering if the attacker is dead. The scene transitions to a peaceful, sunlit sky as the danger passes. With the guards having arrived and the villagers safe, Kasa surveys the aftermath of the attack. Kasa orders a guard to send the injured to the National Hospital for treatment. Tina asks why her father isn't using magic to heal them, and he thinks to himself how kind she is. He pats her head, delivering a grim lesson. Small favors earn gratitude, but great favors can inspire murder. An ungrateful villager points at Tina, once again blaming the cursed child for their misfortune. Kasa's face darkens with fury as he turns to the man and menacingly asks what he said. The terrified man immediately retracts his statement and apologizes for speaking out of turn. Kasa orders his guard to remember the man, noting that treatment will be free for everyone else. Kasa declares that the ungrateful man will have to pay out of his own pocket, leaving the man to panic over the cost. Tina watches in awe, thinking how amazing it is that they can punish the wicked while saving the innocent. Suti looks at Tina and smugly reminds her, "I told you, just trust father." A proud, chibi Kasa poses, asking his children if they now understand how good their father is. Prince Chiduo thinks with relief that it was lucky Duke Kasa arrived, or Sister Tina would have been in trouble. He muses that, when faced with trouble, you don't always have to face it alone, and can sometimes trust adults. With a sad expression, Chiduo holds a charm and wonders where he can find an adult that he can truly trust. In the royal court, A white-bearded official in a wizard's hat reports to the Emperor and Empress about an acid rain incident with numerous casualties. The official adds that before the acid rain, a large number of fish had already died in the moat. He points accusingly, declaring that his calculations show the culprit is the demon's reincarnation, Dorabel Tinakasa. The Empress is shocked, asking, "What?" and exclaiming her disbelief that such a thing could have happened. The wizard gravely warns the Emperor and Empress that if Tina is not eliminated, she will cause even greater disasters when she's older. A long-haired man with glasses peeks from behind a column, hearing the wizard demand action, and worrying that they are targeting Miss Tina again. The long-haired man looks on with concern, internally debating whether he should step forward and help. As the Emperor looks troubled by the news, the Empress watches him intently, waiting for his decision. Suddenly, Kasa arrives with Tina and Suti, calling out to His Majesty and stopping the conversation. Kasa approaches the nervous, sweating wizard, announcing that he has something to report, contemptuously asking Duke Kasa if he has come to plead for his ominous daughter. He coldly states that someone like Tina, born with such bad luck and disaster, doesn't deserve to live. Smack Kasa slaps the wizard hard across the face, leaving the Emperor and Empress shocked as the wizard yelps in pain. Kasa feigns surprise, claiming his hand isn't listening to him, and is randomly hitting dogs as the wizard lies on the floor. Both Suti and Tina look up at their father with wide, astonished chibi eyes. Tina thinks her daddy is a skilled actor, but wishes he would roll on the ground, crying to be even more adorable. The wizard scrambles up, tearfully begging the Emperor for help and pointing an accusing finger at Kasa. He implores the Emperor to execute the demon's daughter quickly, warning that Kasa will only become more crazed over her. Pau Kasa lands another fierce punch, sending the wizard flying as he yells, "Ah!" Kasa dramatically scolds his hand for hitting the dog again, pretending he has no control over it. He then drops to his knees, crying theatrically and begging the Emperor not to blame his hand, which he needs to fight the enemy army. Watch, dumbfounded and sweating, at Kasa's utterly bizarre performance. The flustered Empress is left speechless, wondering why a great general is acting so cute in front of His Majesty. Suti quietly asks her father if he is throwing a tantrum. Suti smiles, realizing she's learned a new tactic. If anyone bullies her sister again, she'll just hit them. The long-haired official steps forward, reporting that while an abnormal event occurred, Duke Kasa handled it with minimal casualties, shouting nonsense and questioning how Kasa's military might could defy the will of heaven. He continues his rant, insisting that Kasa is just a warrior and cannot possibly go against a heavenly mandate. Kasa smirks as a sinister red glow emanates from under his blindfold, hinting at a hidden power, makes an excuse about matters at home, and attempts to flee the court. The Empress smiles dismissively, telling the Emperor to never mind the wizard's outburst. Turning her attention to the children, the Empress acknowledges that Tina, the demon's daughter, did cause trouble. The Empress then scoops Suti into her arms, declaring that their goddess, Suti, helped prevent a disaster. A horrified Tina realizes the Empress is deliberately trying to alienate her from her sister Suti. The Empress holds Suti tightly, smiling slyly at Tina as the court looks on. Presenting Suti to the Emperor, the Empress proclaims that this is the grace of a goddess. The Emperor agrees, calling Suti a good child, as the Empress adds that Suti is a goddess who can resolve anything without effort. The Empress contrasts Suti with inauspicious ones like Tina, whose presence only brings disaster, causing Tina to bow her head. Smirking, the Empress thinks to herself that the 7-year-old brat won't be able to stand such differential treatment. The long-haired official thinks that the Empress is going too far, reminding himself that Tina is just a child. Tina stands alone and dejected, her face completely obscured by shadows of despair. Suti looks at her sad sister, vowing to win the Empress's favor so she can better protect Tina in the future. Tina stifles a laugh, thinking that after 7 years, the Empress's tactics for manipulation haven't improved at all. She internally mocks the Empress's clumsy method of putting one person down to elevate another into laughter, declaring that this situation is actually quite convenient. He stands up with Tina, addressing the Empress and noting that since she insists Tina is a demon and that Suti is a goddess who brings blessings, he scoops Tina into his arms, preparing to make a point. Kasa holds both his daughters, proposing a bizarre question to the court. "Aren't my 2 daughters a match made in heaven?" Smiling fondly, Kasa fantasizes about his 2 daughters being together, free from illness and blessed with many children. A flustered chibi Tina internally scolds her father for his poor choice of words, suggesting he read more books. Mortified, Tina questions her father's strange phrasing, wondering if match made in heaven is an appropriate way to describe her and Suti. Kasa pats Tina's head to comfort her, while Suti sweetly promises to always stay by her sister's side. By her sister's words, Tina looks at Suti and softly speaks her name. A crying chibi Tina is overcome with emotion, thinking that her sister is a little angel. A guard rushes into the throne room, announcing bad news. The Wenluo Empire has declared war and is attacking. The entire court, including Kasa and his children, reacts with shock and disbelief to the sudden news of an invasion. The Empress smirks, seeing Kasa's departure for war as the perfect opportunity to deal with his daughters while they're left in the palace. Kasa entrusts his daughters to the long-haired official, thanking him and asking him to ensure they get home safely. The long-haired official bows, assuring Kasa that he will protect the two young misses with his life. Kasa kneels before the emperor, formally requesting permission to go to the front lines and fight for the empire. The emperor grants Kasa's request, urging him to return quickly with news of victory. Kasa directly asks the emperor what his intentions are for his daughters, seeking assurance of their safety while he is away. Enraged, the empress thinks Kasa is disrespectfully threatening the emperor, seeing his concern as a challenge to imperial authority. The emperor promises Kasa not to worry, assuring him that the children will be allowed to grow up safely. Kasa bows his head in gratitude, thanking the emperor for his assurance. Turning to leave, Kasa smiles at his daughters and promises to bring them back candy upon his return. Tina's eyes light up as she cries happily, excited about the prospect of eating candy. As Kasa walks away, his expression turns somber, reflecting the weight of his departure. Tina's mood shifts as she realizes he's leaving, shouting that she doesn't want candy, she wants her father. She tearfully demands that her stinky daddy must promise to come back alive from the war. Kasa is touched by her concern, affectionately thinking that she has a strange way of saying something nice. Suti looks at her crying sister and asks why she is so upset. Seeing Tina's tears, Suti begins to cry as well, confused about why she suddenly feels so sad. The two sisters suddenly tumble forward, taking the surprised, long-haired official by surprise. The official calls out in alarm as Tina and Suti run past him towards the palace exit. Waving goodbye through their tears, the two girls cry for their father to come back safely as he walks away. Suti desperately grabs her father's cape, crying his name, with a tearful Tina right behind her. Kasa stops and looks back, taken aback by his daughter's sudden emotional display. A chibi Kasa cries, heartbroken by his daughter's tears and admitting he doesn't want to leave them. Clutching his coat, Tina tearfully begs her stinky daddy not to go. Kasa looks down at his lovely child, gently explaining why he has to leave. He reminds her that he is a general, and with war breaking out, countless people are depending on him for salvation. He concludes that protecting his family and his country is a father's ultimate duty. Tina, however, is filled with a terrible premonition, feeling that her father will not return from this battle. Suti bravely accepts his duty, promising she isn't afraid and will take good care of her little sister while he's gone. Smiling, Kasa praises Suti as a good child and tosses a small die-like object, asking her to care for herself and Tina. Suti agrees as a magical butterfly-shaped charm attaches itself near her ear. Watching from afar, the Empress clenches her fist and scoffs at Kasa's words, accusing him of conquering the country rather than protecting it. Kasa bids a final, loving farewell to his treasures, telling them he must go now. He turns and walks towards the light of the doorway, promising his daughters he will be back soon, reassuring his daughters from a distance that he will return soon. As her hands glow with blue energy, a determined Tina vows to find a way to save her father from the coming danger. The long-haired official notices Tina's magic with alarm and calls her name as she seems to vanish. Turning in confusion, he realizes Suti is also gone and calls her name as the Empress looks on, puzzled. The official sweats nervously, thinking that he must prevent the Empress from witnessing Tina's magic. With Kasa gone, the worried official fears that Miss Tina may also be truly gone, having followed her father into danger. The scene transitions to a grand estate 1 month later, where Tina and Suti look on with serious expressions. Fluffy white puppy with sparkling eyes sits inside a pet carrier. A young, black-haired boy with red eyes thoughtfully recalls seeing Tina's little dog die. The nervous boy informs Tina and Suti that the Emperor and Empress want them to stay in the palace, explaining that he thought to invite them since they don't know many people. While the boy blushes furiously, a flustered Suti gasps, wondering what on earth Tina is saying.